Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going, and as I like to remind you each and every day, it expands our base. Are we in the midst of a constitutional crisis? That's the question. On so many different levels, and it's being debated by scholars of the American presidency. And it's fascinating. But I want to begin with J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, the individual who is a heartbeat away from the presidency. J.D. Vance yesterday said that the administration was prepared to ignore legal rulings. In short, if the court makes a ruling, they're prepared to ignore it. And I want to quote him directly. Judges are not allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. Let me say it again. The vice president said, judges are not allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. The executive, of course, is the president of the United States and the executive branch of government. Can you imagine if Richard Nixon had said, and by the way, they thought about it when the Supreme Court ruled 8-0 against Richard Nixon on the Watergate tapes case, with only Justice William Rehnquist recusing himself, Nixon really thought about saying, well, you can't give that order. This is the executive branch. But Nixon complied with the law. Nixon surrendered the tapes. What we are hearing from the Vice President of the United States is a simple statement. Judges are not allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. Now that, to me, sets us up for a constitutional crisis. Make no mistake, this is a serious declaration, and because there will be a court hearing this afternoon dealing with certain aspects of Donald Trump's decisions, well, if the court rules against Donald Trump and he refuses to follow a court ruling, if it goes to the Supreme Court and he refuses to follow a court ruling, then we really are in the midst of a constitutional crisis. The second aspect today is that last week, Donald Trump revoked Joe Biden's security clearance. That means that the former president of the United States is not entitled to security briefings. By the way, this is not unusual. It happened once before, and that is when Joe Biden suspended Donald Trump's right to have security clearance. Now, of course, Joe Biden did it because he was concerned about the implications of January 6th. But what we're seeing now really is pure retribution. And I want to remind you, I've referred to him before, a listener and friend who said to me, well, he's not going to really be involved in retribution. Donald Trump's too big for that. Guess what? He isn't. And then you had a group in the Treasury Department, in a division of the Treasury Department, who said the greatest threat we have ever faced is Doge. What Donald Trump is doing right now with Doge. Now, how do you respond to that? The greatest threat we have ever faced? We also saw last week Donald Trump place himself as chair of the Kennedy Center, an American icon. The Kennedy Center has been one of the most marvelous developments in American government in the last half a century. And yet Donald Trump fired the chair because, frankly, he believes that the Kennedy Center is not reflecting appropriate American values. Can you imagine? He also fired the head of the National Archives. That also a fascinating move. Remember, the head of the National Archives was asked by Joe Biden to certify the Equal Rights Amendment and declined to do it. Let me point out to you as well that there is the whole question of USAID. And the impact of what Donald Trump is doing in dismantling USAID. Does he have the legal right to do it? That is a serious question, and one which I think has to be addressed in the courts. But do you understand the ramifications for health and welfare across the world? We are the backbone of that system that provides aid to people who need it. And finally, you may know that Donald Trump was absolutely livid, furious over the question of Kamala Harris appearing on 60 Minutes during the late presidential campaign. Fascinating that Donald Trump decided that CBS edited that tape. Now, CBS has turned the tape over so it can be examined, but here's the kicker. Donald Trump, on Friday, raised the ante. He was suing CBS for $10 billion. He's up to $20 billion. That's right, $20 billion. And he has said that he wants to put 60 Minutes out of business. In fact, he wants to see CBS put out of business. I want you to stop and think for a minute what it means when a president of the United States takes an action like this. I don't know if he's going to win or not, but do you understand the contradiction? On the one hand, he is using the courts for political revenge. On the other hand, the vice president, J.D. Vance, has made clear that he doesn't think the courts have any power to control the executive's legitimate power. There is a constitutional crisis brewing, and it's going to be a humdinger. And the question we all have to ask is, what do we think? How do we feel about the potential for a president of the United States, and yes, a vice president of the United States, essentially saying that the president is above the courts? In fact, that the president is above the law. Richard Nixon made a statement in the David Frost interviews. It's well worth listening to. He said that the president, if the president does it, it's not against the law. That, to me, is a very dangerous concept. Whether expressed by Richard Nixon or by Donald Trump, the difference is, in the end, Richard Nixon complied with the law. It would appear that Donald Trump has decided to defy the law. And as for my old friend who said, well, Trump isn't out for revenge, what do you call all of this? Of course he is. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. Make sure to follow along and let me know your thoughts on the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and sharing an episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand, which of course is our goal. I want to remind you, you can interact with me on Facebook, on LinkedIn, or you can email me directly, and many of you do, and I'm very grateful for that. And now, my friends, a special thank you to the wonderful producer of this podcast, Gogo Zogar. Gogo, thanks a million. And to all of you, I'll be back tomorrow, right here on Around the Political World with John Rothman. See you then.